the one thing that I found most impressive was when people stand up in times of great adversity. And there's probably none greater than for a public company CEO to find out you've been hacked and to quickly do what is morally and ethically the right thing, but could be bad for your company. And that is to tell everybody, hey, we found this, we're working this. I'd ask you to go over, because I think, it's those lessons in leadership that I most admired about you and what you've done. So why don't you describe what you went through with SolarWinds?
You bet. And again, great to tell the story. I'll do it in 3 minutes or less. But I learned that we had a breach on a Friday afternoon, right after I did an all hands to about 3,700 employees. And I remember, thinking, hey, I'm going to get out of here. I'm in the Reston Town Center. It's Friday afternoon. I'd had a long week. And I looked down at my calendar and it said, security briefing, 5 minutes from now. And I'll never forget that briefing, General, because about 10 minutes into it, I recognized a lot of the tradecraft that we had seen throughout the 90s and early 2000s from the SVR. In other words, somebody was accessing our network the same way we do. But it was clear to me, meaning they were coming from the outside with a registered mobile phone so they could get their 6-digit code and logging into our network. And that's what we detected. We had an employee that saw severity 0 alert, but actually investigated that alert and found out, hey, somebody's accessing our network on a registered phone that doesn't belong to that employee. So somebody was coming in the same way our employees do, but it was obvious to me they'd been in before. And the question just became, for how long? And when you're hacked and it's a lonely place. We respond at Mandiant to about 1,000 intrusions a year, and I get to meet CEOs that have to make the least bad of 10 decisions. And quite frankly, I learned along the way working with so many great CEOs that had to go through public disclosure. And I just remember thinking, General, as soon as we found out we were compromised, we were reappropriating resources from the front lines of incidents to figure out what happened to us. How did they break in? What did they do? What did they take? What's at risk? But very quickly in that case, it became obvious to me that it was the SVR, a foreign intelligence service out of Russia. It stretched credulity to think, hey, my company was target number 1, that there would have to be other targets. And maybe it's just that, Catholic upbringing of guilt. The truth will set you free. I just remember all of us, from the board all the way down to the frontline responders, we wanted to get the threat intelligence in the hands of the government first and foremost, so they could protect the defense industrial base. And then over time, as we didn't want to do fear mongering of let's tell the world we're compromised and nothing else. That does nobody any good. We have to go forward in a metered way of saying, we've got our arms around this. We've been compromised. Here's what happened. Here's what we all need to do about it. We went public in December of 2020, and quite frankly, lost about 20% of our market cap. Customers were up in arms, frustrated. How could you let this happen? I assure you, when you go against the nation's foreign intelligence services as a company, you don't let any of it happen. You're going to lose over time. And but about 3 or 4 days after we went public, with our breach and as much information as we had at the time, we found an implant in the SolarWinds software. And that's when, General, I knew, oh, this is way beyond us. This is a national security issue. And I'll leave you with this one thing. I've worked with great CEOs who during the breach, they had a North Star. Put your customers first, put your shareholders first, whatever they picked. It's the only way you can have a consistent response. At one point during our breach, we literally put as our North Star, defend the nation as the #1 criteria. And we started looking at how do we do that, and protect our customers is all part of that because we protect critical infrastructure and other things. So I'll leave you with this. It wasn't that hard a decision. We knew we had an adversary of Russian foreign intelligence in our network. And we just, had to communicate it as fast as possible.
Yeah, so I remember when I was at NSA, you coming up to NSA and us walking through some of the issues that we faced, like Buckshot Yankee and other things, and you were a tremendous help then as well. So you've been consistent in doing that. Now fast forward to today, as we sit on and watch what's going on in Ukraine, it's clear that Putin is in trouble. and you've got folks over there working it, and you've seen now some of the things that our government is doing and what Ukraine is doing and what Russia is doing. Can you give us your thoughts on that and what you see as the road ahead there?
Absolutely. And it's where we're at now, General, and then where's it going, which is the big mystery, right? It's I think we could probably guess worst case and probably guess best cases. But we've responded to over 30 organizations over there, one financial service, a couple other industries, but primarily we have boots on the ground responding to security breaches at government entities, national, government entities in the Ukraine. And what we're seeing is destructive attacks, espionage, information operations, and they're all going on in theater, primarily conducted by the GRU, or the Military Intelligence Group, and a little bit from the FSB. And I don't believe we've seen a lot of SVR activities over there. Most of the goal is to render networks dysfunctional, just delete as much as you can. And so we have found 7 new wiper malware over there that, evade traditional endpoint defenses and wipe everything. But what we haven't seen yet is what I would call that new and novel, wow, look at that, we've never seen that before kind of attack over there. And it does make me wonder, as we're seeing a lot of new and novel 0 days being armed by folks in China, that it does probably exist in Russia, that they do have the means for new and novel, but maybe they just don't have to use it over there. And that leaves us to, so that's where we're at today. Daily combat, every day, folks on the ground figuring out what just happened, what to do about it. But I think everybody in cybersecurity is wondering, we've got a power, Russia, that does have an offensive capability, what would cause the cyber domain and activities in the cyber domain to escalate. And, I would flip that probably back to you, General. And what do you think happens next based on, we know status quo. They're destroying as much as they can in the Ukraine. The Ukrainians have done a great job being resilient with people and technology to get back up and running and operating through compromise. But I think we're all interested in wondering what would escalate there that would cause the cyber domain to have more than gradual incremental escalation globally.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'll just, because, we talk about this, you and I, about what's going on. I think, the issue for Putin is he's losing. He knows he's losing. So he's fired missiles and stuff to hurt Ukraine and to mollify his base so that they keep him in power. But they also recognize we're losing. And there comes a point where they're losing to, how do we get rid of Putin? So he's got a timeline that he's got to take some action. Last week, it was the going to a dirty bomb. And he was going to use that as a ploy, perhaps to use a tactical nuclear weapon. That's been taken off the table by sharing intelligence. So the only other thing he's got is cyber. And the problem is he's being hammered with cyber by the offense of other nations, including ours. So this is a problem for him. And I think with winter coming on, he doesn't have the ability to supply his troops that are in combat. That's a big issue. If you're out there fighting and you don't have ammo, you don't have food, you don't have water, and you don't have supplies, you don't have clothes, you're thinking we're losing. And so this impacts morale. So I think the next 2 months, we're going to see a huge change in this, and potentially he's going to lash out, and I think it's going to be in cyber. So I think, as we go through this, though, one of the things that you and we've talked about is shields up.
Right. Absolutely.
And I thought it would be good for you to describe what you mean by shields up, because you have a tremendous background in going into a network, finding out we got a problem. How do we solve that problem? So you might start out saying, here's how we go in and help clean something up. Now, how do you do shields up to make sure people just stay clean?
Absolutely. And it's a phrase that came up, you remember the old Star Trek. I love the fact that you can hit a button and the lasers don't work against you, but you can't travel with shields up all the time because you can't hit hyperspeed. At least that's how I understand fictional science. But shields up was a phrase we came up with like a decade ago. When you go into a hostile environment, you go into a network that's compromised by either Chinese cyber espionage or Russian foreign intelligence, and they're not willing to give up the foothold, or they give it up right away. But usually it was one or the other. We'd show up and say, hey, they're compromised, and the offense would evaporate because they didn't want us to observe what they were doing. But now they're coming back, and there's a lot more persistence. So what I mean by shields up, and we work with your company and your folks to do this, is first and foremost, you need whatever you want to defend, you need 100% visibility of it. So if you have a network, if you only want to defend 10%, that's fine. Get visibility on the 10%. If you don't treat all assets equal. But usually we start with, we need network visibility everywhere. We got to have telemetry that is comprehensive to safeguarding all the assets somebody wants to safeguard. Fastest way to do that is network-based telemetry. Followed by, then we want endpoint. We want to be able to kind of merge the evidence or indicators of compromise from the network to the endpoint. And this is, responding to a breach, but even proactively before you have a breach, you'd like to have 100% coverage of your safeguards. It does no good to lock 99 doors on the building if the 100th door is wide open and people can just walk in and steal everything. So you start with visibility, network-based countermeasures, endpoint-based countermeasures, and a lot of threat intelligence. You know what to look for. You have an agile learning system that can adapt to things that are new, that haven't been seen, that are anomalous. And then sometimes you need experts to back that up. So that's the fastest way I can explain it: that visibility, network-based telemetry, endpoint-based telemetry, know what to look for, have experts, and it's got to be a system that's adaptable. You can change it immediately. If somebody learns of a new threat, you have to have that information sharing to immediately plug it in and see, hey, now we can defend against that. So to me, shields up means those things: get that network covered, get the endpoint covered, get the visibility, get the threat intel, get the partners, and then execute an agile defense.
I think with all that your company does right now and those 1,000 plus responses a year, if you had visibility and we could share that data technically into a collective domain, we'd have the beginnings of how to defend a country. I think as we go into it, the biggest threat, many say to us in the future, is China. Xi Jinping being elected for a third term, he has stated unequivocally that he wants to have Taiwan as part of China, whether it's done diplomatically or by force. And he said, we are not ruling out the use of force. That brings in a whole new situation for our country, because Russia's got some great people and some great folks working in cyber, but they have a population 1/10 the size of China. Mm-hmm. Now put China on the table and you've got 10 times as much. So what are your thoughts about China? What are you seeing, and what do you think about the future there? I'll leave that wide open for you.
Well, that's so wide open. I almost want to come back to you with, so, how do we want to cover that before we cover defend the nation? I mean, I can tell you, you add up every modern threat group, criminal, offense from different nations, all of it is less than what China does on offense, in my opinion. Just the scale and scope of which they operate is far wider and broader than any one company can respond to. So we have more visibility into what Chinese threat actors are doing today than ever before. They are changing. They are innovating. I used to feel like it was Russia number one, China kind of number two, and then everybody else after that. I would argue in the last 7 months, what I've seen, I still think Russia's here, but I think China's coming right up to there as well. They are coming up with new and novel things we haven't seen before. We just went public with VMware for malware, not a 0-day, not a vulnerability, but malware specific to attacking virtual machines. It was smart stuff. Whenever you have reverse engineers looking at malware for weeks to really get their arms around it, you've got an offense creating something new. So the capability of China is going up and to the right. Their scale and capacity is unbelievable. So that means, General, and what I'd flip back to you is, so how do we defend the nation when we both know, and everyone on this call will know, the next modern war, should there be one, even before there's kinetics, I think the silent intention of nations is going to be displayed in cyber. So how do we get the nation to kind of be able to do a shields up, period?
I think, so I'm going to make this part of a conversation versus jumping in, because we add in the theft of intellectual property, the greatest transfer of wealth in history. They need that to fuel their economic engine. And as you noted, the next war is going to start with cyber, and Taiwan will be I think the critical point where this all starts to happen. And as a consequence, your question of, so how do we work together to defend together? You explain parts of it in your
Yes.
Shields Up. You know, we have to have all those things for one company. And then the key is if we can share that at one company and put that in the cloud and anonymize it at network speed, along with behavioral events, then what we can do is we can see patterns and stuff of what's going on. I think the future of cyber is taking, so this is where what you do at Mandiant and taking all that data, anonymizing it and putting it in the cloud along with what we do and others, and then seeing those patterns. And so one group that's handling an event over here and sees one over here, those can be shared automatically. In fact, before the incident responders get in, those events should already be correlating if we do this right. And the government could share that. So we had a discussion about the role of the government in Ukraine and where that's going. But the real key is sharing this information at network speed with the government, which you did in part with how you did SolarWinds. As soon as you knew it, you shared it with the government because it's critical for the defense of our nation. I'd just like to get your thoughts on, okay, so if we can share all this, we can correlate it in the private sector and sharing it with the government starts to get that public-private partnership working together. Could you just talk a little bit on that?
Yeah, and I jump back to, as the government, you look at what C.I.S.S is doing and the NSA and all the different consortiums that are working together to defend the government. I've always felt government needs to defend government first. That's the start. Then government needs to defend critical infrastructure. Then government defends everything it can defend. And I feel as a nation, we're in the phase of government helping to defend critical infrastructure. We kind of have government defending government. That makes sense. And then you have NSA defending defense industrial base and other agencies helping defend critical infrastructure. What's working now, and maybe it's the best to say it, is Ukraine. There's a Slack channel open right now, and there's folks from many different companies in it, as well as the government. If anything new and novel is seen, it's going off on people's phones right now at many different private sector companies, as well as government agencies. We've got something new. There's new indicators. There's a new method. It's real time. I mean, it's still human detection, but somebody out there is going to see something. And I do believe this, General. Gone are the days where the intel's like your intellectual property. You can't just hoard it and go, hey, we saw something new and novel. Let's differentiate our software that way. Like the old Symantec and McAfee's used to do with, we have the best AV because it detects more. We're all in it together. So in this channel, you do have CISA, you do have other government agencies, you do have the private sector. And I can tell you this, if my company sees something new and novel, there's other vendors that are aware of it and government agencies aware of it long before the public's aware of it, long before a lot of people are aware of it. It happens same day. And to put that in perspective, when I first started responding to breaches in the 90s, there's a lot of things that we learned that nobody ever got, and then it was months and then it was weeks. We're same day for new and novel attacks right now as a nation. Now, the challenge is, okay, now we're aware of it. The Shields Up part is to make sure that you get the most coverage from the endpoint security companies, the network security companies, and it happens very quickly. So we're far more agile today than even 3 or 4 years ago. But you've described a pattern where we have to defend at network speed. We're not quite there yet. We're still having a human find the anomaly and kind of flip it. I think there's some things being shared at network speed, between firewall companies and between network security monitoring tools. On the endpoint, I think it's a little slower because sometimes the safeguards could have real deleterious effects to the endpoint. If you get it wrong, you could shut down valid software. So there's challenges there. But what you described as, we call it Shields Up. We're now getting into collaborative Shields Up, collaborative defense. There will come a day, in my opinion, where it is all automated, where something new is detected and 75 different vendors' products just update automatically to stop the new threat. And the perfect win, sir, I believe, is if anybody circumvents a safeguard somewhere for the first time, it only works once, and then boom, we're back to Shields Up everywhere else. And that's probably the best learning system you can do is learn from, capture new and novel as fast as you can and just propagate it to everybody as fast as possible.
This is analogous to cancer research. So one of the folks that we had that helped us develop our behavioral analytics runs the Human Genome Center at University of Chicago, one of the best behavioral data scientists in the world. And when you think about what you're saying, the intent would be, can we just push out all the information that we see, whether it's malicious, suspicious, or benign, just push it out there and allow the system to start to correlate. So if we did that for SolarWinds as an example, most of the companies assumed that it was benign because of the age of the C2 site. But if they saw 18,000 people talking to it all at once and all this going on, what they would do is to say, that doesn't look right. And now they're talking to the government, and they could have seen that at network speed. So I know we're getting close to our time, and they wanted us to end a minute or two early for a break for some of the people on there. I would just say, Kevin, you got this award the old-fashioned way. You earned it. What you do is a guiding light for what all of us should do when we're in stressful situations where the defense of our country should be our principal thought. And so, an honor and privilege to be on here with you today. Congratulations on the award. It is well deserved, and it's an honor and privilege to work with you and your team. So thank you very much, Kevin. And any final words that you'd like to say?
We're getting better. And I just want to thank you and everybody for this award. It means a lot to the employees of Mandiant. And we hope to keep doing what we're doing. And someday we hope to wake up and feel very confident that we have nothing to worry about in the cyber domain.
Yeah, someday.
Someday for sure. Gentlemen, again, above and beyond, thank you to you both. Thank you so very, very much for all of your service, just everything that you represent, your incredible legacy. We appreciate it so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Have a great day, gentlemen.